Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining Ceres, CalSTART, and NRDC for today's webinar, Accelerating Corporate Support for the Advanced Clean Cars II program. We're going to give folks just about another 30 seconds or so to join before we dive into today's webinar. So please sit tight and we'll begin shortly. All right, looks like we've got a critical mass of attendees. Thanks again, everyone, for joining Ceres, CalSTART, and NRDC for today's webinar on the Advanced Clean Cars II rule and the business case for vehicle electrification. My name is Dave Roba, and I lead clean transportation work on the Ceres State Policy team. I'll be hosting today's webinar, and I'm thrilled you could join us for this event. Next slide, please. We have a great lineup of speakers for you today, including Marissa Anderson, California ZEV Regulatory Lead from Ford, Steve Scher, Vice President of Government Affairs at Hertz, Paul Augustine, Head of Sustainability at Lyft, Abby Campbell, Senior Director for Climate and Infrastructure Policy at Siemens, Kathy Harris, Clean Vehicles and Fuels Advocate from the National Resource Defense Council, Jessica Olson, Vice President Policy at CalSTART, Joel Creswell, Climate Policy Section Manager for the Air Quality Program at the Washington Department of Ecology, and Christine Kirby, Assistant Commissioner of Air and Waste with Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. Next slide, please. To quickly recap the agenda for today, we're going to kick things off with an overview of the Advanced Clean Cars II program provided by NRDC. We'll then move to a panel discussion on the business case for vehicle electrification, monitored by CalSTART, including Ford, Siemens, Hertz, and Lyft. We'll then have a second panel discussion with perspectives on adoption of the Advanced Clean Cars II rule from Massachusetts and Washington State. And we're going to wrap things up with a preview of upcoming opportunities for engagement. Next slide, please. For viewers who are joining Ceres for the first time today, we're a nonprofit organization working with some of the most influential capital market leaders toward our mission of building a more just and sustainable future for people and the planet. We hope to achieve our mission by advancing progress against 4 global outcomes, which you can see at the bottom half of this slide. The Ceres policy team works to support these outcomes primarily by elevating the business case for clean energy and transportation policy in partnership with private sector leaders on sustainability. Next slide, please. This partnership includes the Business for Innovative Climate and Energy Policy, or BICEP network, which at 75 members strong represents some of the most recognizable brands in the US, all of which you can see the logos of on your screen now. I'm thrilled to have many members of the BICEP network joining us for today's event, including on the speaker roster, so thank you all for your time. Next slide, please. Ceres also organizes the Corporate Electric Vehicle Alliance, which is a collaborative of companies focused on accelerating the transition to electric vehicles by supporting companies in making and achieving bold commitments to fleet electrification. The Alliance also loosely aggregates corporate demand for electric vehicles to expand the business case for production of a more diverse array of EV models. And again, thrilled to have several members of CEVA with us this afternoon. Next slide, please. So with introductions out of the way, I'm thrilled to introduce Kathy Harris, Clean Vehicles and Fuels Advocate at the National Resource Defense Council, to provide us with an overview of the of the case for the Advanced Clean Cars II rule. Welcome, Kathy. Thanks so much. Please take it away.
Thanks so much, Dave. Hi, everybody. So as Dave mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Advanced Clean Cars 2 regulation, or ACC II, and why it's really important that we start to make this shift towards electric vehicles and zero emission vehicles. So to kind of set the stage originally, I wanted to just show why the transition is important. So as you can see from this chart, the transportation sector is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. And if we move to the next slide, we can see that of the amount of emissions coming from the transportation sector, the majority of those emissions are coming from the light duty vehicles. So it's really important when we think about how to reduce emissions from this sector, we really start to tackle that sector that is the highest polluting, and that is our passenger cars and trucks. And in addition, as I'll talk about a little later, to the high amounts of greenhouse gas emissions, the transportation sector is also responsible for harmful emissions as well, such as nitrogen oxides and particulate matter. So if you go to the next slide, with that kind of background, the California Air Resources Board has started to think about ways that we can help to accelerate this transition to a zero emission vehicle future. And the way they've chosen to do this is through the Advanced Clean Cars 2 regulation. California adopted this regulation back in August, and this is an update to the current Clean Cars regulation, which goes through vehicle model year 2025. The new regulation now goes from model year 2026 up to model year 2035. And as you can see from this chart, it now sets year over year requirements for manufacturers to sell new electric vehicles new zero emission vehicles year over year. So starting at 35% of new vehicle sales needing to be a zero emission by 2026, and moving up to 100% by model year 2035. And now that California has adopted these regulations, under the Clean Air Act, other states are able to adopt these standards as well. As you'll hear about from some of our panelists later, several states have actually already begun the rulemaking process to further adopt these regulations that California has in place. It's important to know that these requirements are on new vehicle sales only. And under the regulations, when we talk about zero emission vehicles, we mean battery electric vehicles, plug-in hybrid vehicles, and fuel cell electric vehicles. And again, this is only on light duty vehicles and some medium and heavy duty or medium vehicles as well, but majority in our passenger cars and trucks realm. But it's also really important to know when we look at this chart that the Air Resources Board, in adopting the Advanced Clean Cars 2 regulation, has included several different flexibilities in the regulation that will help manufacturers achieve these requirements, including a variety of different credit usages, such as early compliance credits, historical credits, etc. So while the actual flexibilities will vary requirements will vary state by state, depending on how states depending on how manufacturers utilize the flexibilities in place. By our estimates, we're anticipating most states will have about a 20 to 25% new zero emission vehicle sales requirement in model year 2026. So next slide, please. So with all that being said, on the background of the regulation, I wanted to kind of further highlight now why these rules are important, not only for the greenhouse gas emissions benefits and for climate, but also for air quality, health, and saving drivers and fleets money through the transition to zero emission vehicles. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, transportation is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. And by transitioning to zero emission vehicles, we can see that even with today's current grid mix, I chose Pennsylvania just as an example, but this is similar throughout the rest of the United States. Using the current grid mix, which electric vehicles need to utilize to be able to refuel their vehicles, even today, zero emission vehicles and electric vehicles have significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. And we can anticipate that these will continue to decrease over time as we include more renewable energy sources onto the grid. Next slide, please. And zero emission vehicles also help to improve air quality and health. A recent report from the American Lung Association called Zeroing In on Healthy Air. The link is on this slide. I'm also happy to follow up with this report later. It's a great report. But this shows that zero emission vehicles with this transition will significantly reduce nitrogen oxides, volatile organic compounds, and fine particulates over time, which associates with significant public health benefits. So between 2020 and 2050, with the transition to zero emission vehicles, we can anticipate over 100,000 premature deaths avoided, as well as over 2.7 million asthma attacks avoided. So there are significant health and air quality benefits. Next slide, please. Zero emission vehicles also have significant economic benefits as well. So this chart shows the volatile gas prices of gasoline over time, but also, which is the red, but the blue part of the chart that you see here is the price of electricity. So we can see that even though the gasoline prices are extremely volatile, depending on the state of the world at the time, electricity prices have remained relatively flat over the same period. And additionally, so that will help to save drivers and fleets fueling costs for these vehicles. And additionally, since zero emission vehicles have fewer moving parts than their gasoline counterparts, they have lower maintenance costs as well, which will further help to reduce the costs of operation for drivers and fleets. Next slide, please. So now that we've talked a lot about the benefits, I wanted to highlight that ACC, the Advanced Clean Cars II regulation, is really just helping to accelerate the transition that we're already seeing occurring in the automotive industry. So if you go to the next slide, as I'm sure many of our panelists will continue to talk about in the next session, I wanted to just highlight that automakers and fleets around the country have already started to make transitions towards the zero emission vehicle future. Here are just some screenshots that I captured, which are a little outdated because we're seeing more and more of these announcements over time. And one piece of data that I saw was that over $97 billion have been announced already from automakers in the United States to help accelerate this transition to zero emission vehicles. So we're seeing the businesses and the companies really embrace this new technology and this transition to a cleaner future. And if we go to the next slide, but I finally wanted to highlight that even though we're seeing the automakers make this transition as well, we're also seeing that drivers are also really wanting these vehicles too. So these charts just show the increase of electric vehicle sales that we've been seeing over time. And in fact, of June of this year, sales across the United States were at 8.4%, which is up from about 4.92% in June of last year. So we're already seeing a double increase in the amount of interest from drivers over the course of a year. And California has reached 16% sales in the first quarter of 2022. So there is also significant interest from drivers to embrace this technology and this transition to clean zero emission vehicles, as well as the automakers also starting to embrace this technology as well. And so if we go to the next slide, I think that was my last one. I know that was a lot of information, and I think our panelists will be able to go into more detail on the regulation and some more of these benefits. Here's my contact information if anyone has any additional questions. And with that, I will turn it back over to Dave.
Great. Thank you so much, Kathy. Can we move to the next slide, please? So now that we've covered the Advanced Clean Cars II program's goals, its potential to increase access to EVs, and some of the benefits of the program, I'm thrilled to introduce our business panel, including representatives from Ford, Hertz, Lyft, and Siemens, to share some of their perspectives on the benefits of vehicle electrification. Jess Olson, the Vice President of Policy at CalSTART, will be moderating the discussion. So without further ado, please welcome our panelists, and please take it away, Jess.
Thanks so much, Dave. Really appreciate it. And thank you all to our business leaders for joining the panel today. Private sector leaders are really already at the forefront of the transition to electric vehicles. And we wanted to give them an opportunity to discuss their goals for incorporating EVs into their business plans and share some of the benefits they've seen from the transition. Real quick, for those who don't know, CalSTART, we are a clean technology consortium that's neither a trade association nor a traditional environmental advocacy organization, but we're really growing our policy presence in the space because we see the opportunity after 30 years of experience in clean transportation to really start accelerating that transition. To begin the panel discussion, maybe we'll ask each company to briefly introduce their business, highlight their clean energy and transportation goals, and just share why they have set those goals. So let's get into it. I'll start with Steve. Go ahead and share some examples of how you're already using EVs in your operations and some of the benefits you see from switching.
Thanks, Jessica. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here today, and thank you for the opportunity. As everyone knows, Hertz is well underway in its strategy to electrify our fleet through large-scale vehicle acquisitions, charger partnerships with installations at all of many of our locations across the country. We're looking ahead, and we're seeing a future where EVs are the norm. And we view this not only as a good business decision, but that's just there's an air of inevitability here. And Hertz is the leader among not only car rental fleets, but all fleets in terms of our electrification strategy. And so I look forward to exploring this topic a little bit furthermore and telling you more about Hertz's electrification efforts to date, including some big announcements taking place today and this week. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate that. Marissa, tell us about Ford's efforts.
Sure, Jessica, thanks. I'm excited to be here and share some insights on Ford's perspectives on electrification and the California Advanced Clean Cars II rule. Ford believes that combating climate change is both a human rights issue as well as a strategic priority, and we're fully committed to leading in electrification. As Kathy kind of teased up, we've got a lot of plans in place, and we've made a lot of big announcements. We plan for more than half our global production to be EVs by 2030. In addition, we've announced plans to invest over $50 billion through 2026 to ensure we can reach our aspirational targets on climate change and achieve carbon neutrality globally no later than 2050. Building on the strong demand we're already seeing for our EVs in the market, in July, we announced a series of initiatives to source battery capacity and raw materials that will enable us to reach our targeted annual sales volume of 600,000 electric vehicles by late 2023 and more than 2 million EVs by the end of 2026. We're working to create a new EV supply chain that upholds our commitments to both sustainability and human rights. As we all know, the EV revolution is happening right now, and Ford intends to not only be a part of it, but to lead our industry in creating ultra-efficient, carbon-neutral EV manufacturing systems to deliver our products to millions of people across the US and globally. We really appreciate this opportunity to be here today, and I'm excited for the discussion.
Thanks, Marissa. And I'm going to use my moderator's privilege to say I recently drove a Ford Lightning, and man, that thing is fast. I really enjoyed that. So if anyone has a chance to do that, you should. Great. Paul, why don't you talk to us about what Lyft is doing?
Sure thing. Thanks for having me, and just thanks for moderating this panel. Lyft is one of the largest transportation networks in the United States and Canada. We bring together rideshare, shared bikes, shared scooters, car rentals, and transit all in one app. And we're singularly driven by our mission, which is to improve people's lives with the world's best transportation. And stemming from that mission, Lyft is committed to accelerating this transition to clean transportation. Early in the pandemic, as we reviewed our business strategy and our environmental impact, we were not satisfied by the pace of transition to EVs. So in June 2020, we made an industry-leading commitment to achieve 100% EVs on our platform by 2030. We wanted to catalyze change. We wanted to indicate that there's going to be strong demand for EVs over the coming decade, and we wanted to create a path for others to follow. We've been excited about what we've seen since making that commitment a couple of years ago, and we've been working over the past couple of years to execute on the plan that we laid out when we made our 100% EV commitment. From an operational standpoint, that means leading with our Express Drive EV rental program, which is a flexible weekly rental program in which we work with rental providers, including Hertz, to provide near-term EV access for our drivers. We think this is a really important way to accelerate EV adoption. and to increase access and equity, because rentals address key EV adoption barriers, including protecting our drivers from the high upfront cost of EVs compared to gas vehicles. We can also boost EV exposure and education and awareness, which is a key barrier today. And then we can also leverage our purchasing power to access supply of vehicles and charging. And policy is really important. We'll get, I think, into that in further question.
Great. Thanks so much, Paul. So Abby, last but certainly not least, coming from really the infrastructure side of things, tell us what Siemens is doing, what you're looking at, what benefits you're looking at.
Thank you, Jessica, and thanks to the Ceres team for having me. For us, electrification is a very central core part of what we do. We see this topic from consumer, but also a supplier, a manufacturer, and technology provider. We have over 10,000 vehicles in the US. We're currently on our own journey to electrify all of those vehicles. So we can definitely appreciate, as consumers and customers are going through their own electrification journey, we're a part of the climate group's EV 100. So it's a central commitment to us, and it's one that we also see as an opportunity to understand again where our customers and partners are coming from. Stepping back across the whole of Siemens, we're a manufacturer, technology provider, and supplier. So we really do the work from the plug to the grid. We do level 2 chargers, we do DC fast, we work on really innovative technologies, including bidirectional with our partners at Ford Motor Company with the F-150 Lightning charger. And for us, there's a real moment in time here to not just modernize transportation, but to modernize the grid and to really put forward equitable 21st century infrastructure. So excited to be here today.
Great, Abby. Thanks so much. Wow. So many really exciting changes underway in this space. Lots of investments here. Let's talk about how increased access to EVs really support your company's plans to stay competitive in the future, which is very important, of course, to all of you. Maybe we'll go in reverse this time. Abby, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. So I think, for us, we are a global company. We've been in the US over 160 years. When we talk about electrification, it's a market that's developing rapidly. And so we've seen real increased movement across the globe, and we're so excited to now see really significant movement at the federal level here in the US. So when we talk about the bipartisan infrastructure law or the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a real opportunity and ability for entities like ourselves to start investing here. So an example of that is last year we made the announcement that we would bring back our level 2 charging here to the US and to produce over 1 million chargers over 4 years. We've now seen the expansion of legislation to include additional facets. And so for us, there's now additional opportunities that we look at when we talk about this national highway of corridor charging, community charging, when we start talking about real resiliency efforts in terms of not just charging stations on a map, but resiliency opportunities. And then when we talk about community benefit, we're looking at a lot of different projects right now in terms of how we can ensure that these assets are distributed in an equitable way, right? There's different use cases if it's a city, if it's a commercial customer, if it's a rural customer. And so really trying to work through and understand what those dimensions are, what the use cases are, and what some of the challenges have been so that we can start overcoming them moving forward.
Great, thanks so much. Maybe, Paul, let's circle back with Lyft's vision of competitiveness on this.
Yeah, sounds good. So my role at Lyft is to lead sustainability, which includes, or is focused on reducing our environmental impact. And there are many environmental impacts, of course, of EVs, but it's not just about doing something that is good for the planet. It's also really important to our business. The drivers are the lifeblood of Lyft's business, and EVs are a way to help our drivers keep more money in their pocket, which is really important for us. We're seeing this kind of play out through the pandemic and through the rising gas prices in terms of EV adoption across the platform. We've seen about 60% year-over-year growth among our drivers in EV adoption, and this is despite supply chain constraints on EVs. So there's growing demand, and it's because the economics work for our drivers, and it's helpful to our business overall.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Marissa, Ford has had a lot of exciting announcements lately, a lot of changes going on. to support deployment of EVs. Tell us a little bit about your view of competitiveness in the future.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely an exciting time to be a part of the automotive industry. I think everybody online today kind of shows a different piece of the excitement that's happening. For the first time, what we've seen is a majority of customers who intend to buy a car in the next 2 years say they will choose an EV or a hybrid vehicle. This is up about 11% from last year and about 22% from 2020, according to research that was published earlier this year by Ernst & Young. Most of that increase that we're seeing is for full EVs. And then even among our commercial owners who don't already deploy EVs, about 60% of them in a Ford Pro survey said that they're going to intend to start looking for EVs for solutions for their businesses. The market reactions we've seen for F-150 Lightning, as you shared, Jess, as well as Mustang Mach-E, is strong. It's bringing all new customers to Ford, and we're really excited to be a part of the excitement. We've got ambitious goals. We plan to lead this EV revolution, and we look forward to continued work with all of our global partners to make it happen.
Well, Marissa, since you mentioned it, let's connect offline about that Mach-E test drive. Looking forward to that.
I'll see what I can do. I know a person.
All right. You know a guy, yeah. Great. Well, Steve, why don't you round out this question? What are your plans? What is Hertz looking at? Talk to us about competitiveness.
Yeah, Hertz really is in a unique position as a key connector for electrification and electric vehicle adoption. We touch almost every aspect of the ecosystem, from leisure travelers to business travelers, airports, communities, rideshare drivers, even charger manufacturers and utilities, and local governments, of course. And so in that role, we view ourselves as a leader and a driver of EV adoption. And you can take each one of those elements that I just mentioned and break it down. For leisure drivers, we give we give consumers the ability to try an EV before they buy it by renting one from Hertz. For business travelers, we give corporations the ability to reduce their carbon footprint by renting an EV when their employees are traveling. And for airports, we're working closely with our airport partners on electrifying the campus, making sure that there's enough power infrastructure, and bringing in chargers for not only the Hertz locations, but for the general public and our customers as well. And of course, that includes a deep partnership with utilities. It's an important component to what we're trying to accomplish here. And I know we'll talk a little bit about how the government can help stimulate or expedite that process. But our partnership with utilities is really important, and one that we're working very closely with. And then local governments and communities. We need to identify how we can support EV adoption and conversion over time. And so working with cities and communities and even states to help find ways to convert, deploy, and convince folks that EVs are the way of the future. I'll point out that Hertz currently has EVs available at 500 locations across 38 states and growing. And again, through our large scale adoption. And I'll give everyone a preview of some news that just broke, that we just announced an agreement with GM to acquire up to 175,000 EVs over the next 5 years. And so if that doesn't demonstrate our commitment to electrification over time, I don't know what does. And just lastly, on our rideshare partnerships, we've seen tremendous support by not only drivers, but also consumers who report that they have a better experience. Drivers are earning more money, and having an EV available for mobility is certainly something that is beneficial to every aspect of not only our climate, but our communities.
Steve, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. Congratulations on the announcement. That's huge. And I really, as someone who recently rented a Tesla from Hertz for a business trip in Chicago, I can tell you that this is absolutely the way to do it. Because I went home to my husband and I said, "Whoa, those Model 3s are really something." And we did not have any problems finding charging infrastructure in the greater Chicago area. So kudos to you on that. Really, to our panelists, this transition is really supporting growth in your businesses, given all the comments that you've shared with us. Your company's contributions clearly are already hard at work driving this transition to electric vehicles. From your perspectives, what are the benefits of having that strong policy support at the state level for companies like yours looking to switch to electric vehicles? maybe we'll start with Steve. Why don't we just go back in reverse with you?
Yeah, we view the government as an important partner in EV adoption over time. And we have to look at this in sort of stages. We have to, with the NEVI program and the infrastructure law last year, they're addressing charger anxiety, which is a key component to overcoming some hesitancy to move towards EVs. And so with that government funding, it's going to help expedite and speed up the process to conversion. And then really, I think that's the role of policymakers, is how do we work together in partnership to find solutions, to stimulate demand, to alleviate concerns, and to work with the private sector to help facilitate and expedite EV adoption and conversion. And I think that's really the best thing that the government can do at every level, is to partner with those of us who are in the industry, who are moving towards an electrified future, and find ways that we can work together to solve these challenges.
Great, appreciate that perspective. Thanks so much. Marissa, Ford's really been out in front in terms of supporting some strong policies. Talk to us about the benefits of that for you.
Yeah, sure. For Ford, combating climate change has always been a strategic priority for our company. Excuse me. And we've been proud to partner with California on many environmental policies and regulations over the years. It's really impossible to overstate the importance of this Advanced Clean Cars 2 rule. It's going to define the future landscape of transportation, not only for California, but for the nation. We supported this rule publicly in California. And while the ZEV sales requirements defined in ACC II are extremely aggressive, California has been extremely successful in increasing their EV sales for very important reasons. They put the right supportive policies in place to enable their success. The latest statistics I've seen is that about roughly 35 to 40% of US EV sales are in the state of California. And following that, our hope is that states wishing to duplicate California's success will follow their lead and adopt the same supportive policies, things including vehicle incentives to make them more affordable in the near term, EV education initiatives, as well as EV charger deployment and infrastructure development. We applaud California's focus on transportation equity. We believe every person should have access to clean transportation and support a just and equitable transition as we shift to electrification. This ACC II rule is fundamentally the most impactful rulemaking of my lifetime, probably all of our lifetime. And it's going to take all of us working together to create a framework of policies to drive successful adoption of EVs.
Great, thanks so much. Really appreciate that perspective. Really is a historic regulation. Paul, why don't you talk to us about the importance of policy from Lyft's perspective?
Sure, thank you. Policy is absolutely critical. Over 90% of Lyft's carbon footprint comes from the vehicles driving on our platform, and we have limited control over those vehicles. So we know we can't achieve our 100% EV goal on our own. We need the collective action of industry and different segments of the private sector working together with the government to make this possible and to ensure that the transition to electric vehicles is cost effective for our drivers. We are specifically dependent on strong vehicle standards, and this is why historically we have supported strong vehicle efficiency standards, including filing amicus briefs in 2019 and 2020, supporting California and other states in a lawsuit pushing back against the rollback of federal fuel efficiency standards. And ACC II is the next level, pushing the industry forward and ensuring that there is adequate supply of zero emission vehicles to meet the growing demand from drivers on our platform. And this also helps to encourage economies of scale that will ultimately bring down the cost of EVs for our drivers. So that's really important. And we are happy to add our voice in support of ACC II and other states' adoption of ACC II.
Great, thanks, Paul. Yeah, that scaling issue is so important. Abby, tell us about how Siemens is seeing the of ACC II and other policy support at the state level for companies looking to make the switch.
Sure. So I would say that foundationally, federal, state, local policy clarity and certainty is critical for us to make investment, to have long-term certainty. when we have those things, and I think it's been seen and touched on today, you really see businesses come forward, make bold investments, movements to deploying these technologies. I think alongside that, really focusing on community ownership, benefit, investment, and opportunity. And so very much echo the comments that colleagues have said in terms of California and its leadership and work on this. I think what we're also seeing too is a very interesting emergence of states like Georgia, North Carolina, Kentucky, just to name a few, that are really invested in EVs and the adoption. And I think when we talk about that, they see a lot of benefit in terms of investment opportunities in this transition to a green economy. And so for us, we're really excited, I think, about all the potential and opportunities, but also the partnerships. I think we touched on a lot of different points today, but it'll take a lot of work to move forward on this electrification area. So steps and certainty by policies that were discussed today really give us that direction, particularly for a charging manufacturer. We need those automakers to come first and to really start deploying those technologies so that we can also do our part.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I can really appreciate that. It's a rising tide lifts all boats, right? And we are going to need that here to help really get the transition right. I want to just thank all of you for sharing your leadership role here in the transition and sharing your thoughts with us and your experience as your companies make investments in the transition. So thanks for being here today, and back to you, Dave.
Great. Thanks so much, Jess. And thanks again to all of our panelists. It's always one of my favorite parts of this job to hear directly from companies on how they're taking bold action to advance the transition, whether it's to EVs or clean energy. Now I'm pleased to hand the reins over to my colleague, Allie Gold-Roberts, Senior Director of State Policy on the State Policy team at Ceres, for a second panel discussion, including Joel Creswell, Climate Policy Section Manager of the Air Quality Program at the Washington Department of Ecology, and Christine Kirby, Assistant Commissioner of Air and Waste at the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. Please take it away, Allie.
Thank you so much. What a great opportunity for us to follow on that incredible conversation. So far we've heard about the goals of the highly ambitious Advanced Clean Cars II rule and discussed the benefits both for businesses who are making the transition to electric vehicles, and of course then for society as well. To give our viewers a comprehensive look at the potential for ACC II to accelerate EV, we're gonna have some now perspectives from states who are trying to follow California's lead. We expect that both Massachusetts and Washington are going to be soon next in the lineup, and we're thrilled to have representatives from both states for the conversation. So Christine and Joel, thank you so much for taking the time. We're going to get to hear a little bit more about the leadership on the coast. So thank you for joining us. Let's start with just a little bit. We've heard a lot about the business support, obviously, from the last panel, and we think it's important to show that states beyond California obviously share similar vehicle electrification goals. Can you tell our viewers a little bit about the climate goals state and how ACC II is a helpful tool in the toolbox to get you to your goals? And Christine, since you're unmuted, we'll go to you first.
Great, thank you, Allie, and thank you to Ceres for organizing this. This has been a great panel, and I was really interested in what the business community had to say, and looking forward to the partnership. And ACC II passing was really monumental. Having worked in this area for so long, it was just an incredible vote by the board, and it really is giving us a powerful tool. But let me just talk about how it supports our climate goals. Massachusetts has set incredibly ambitious climate and greenhouse gas emission reduction goals under both the Global Warming Solutions Act and the Climate Law of 2021, which was signed in 2021 by Governor Baker. So in 2010, under the Global Warming Solutions Act, Massachusetts set a 25% goal below 1990 emissions. And this goal was met, and it was met by a margin, some of it due to COVID, but most of it due to all the leading policies that we have in place, including the low emission vehicle program and greenhouse gas emission standards, as well as EV requirements. And going forward, under the Climate Law of 2021, we have some really ambitious reduction goals to meet. 2025, we have to be 33% below 1990. 2030, 50% below. The Clean Energy and Climate Plan in Massachusetts was released on June 30th this year. And it established sublimits for 6 sectors, including transportation, which we're talking about today. And then going forward, in 2040, emissions have to be 75% below 1990, and by 2050, we are required to meet net zero. Getting to the policies, the Clean Energy and Climate Plan, the transportation sector programs, very much highlight the transition to electric vehicles. Just to highlight the policies, one of the policies in the plan is ACC II and the adoption of California standards, which we have done since 1991 and modified numerous times. But again, ACC II is transformational. I think we all can agree to that. At the end of last year, we adopted the Advanced Clean Trucks Rule. It was a webinar about a year ago on this by Ceres, so we're happy to be back again. And then we're also focusing under the CECP about continuing increasing consumer rebates and moving to the point of sale rebate, which we don't have now, but we're committed to doing so. Continuing and increasing our deployment of EV charging infrastructure. And we're doing really great work there, and we want to continue to do that work. And one of the things that I did want to mention is that we have a focus on environmental justice and transitioning diesel vehicles to electric, and for example, highlighting transit and school buses and electrifying those fleets will provide not only air quality benefits, but other benefits to our communities that may be overburdened by air pollution. So with that, I will stop there and turn it back to you, Allie.
Thanks, Christine. You laid out a lot for us to peel back and dig into. So we will come back to many of those policies and programs you discussed. Joel, we'll let you help us set the stage on the West.
Yeah, thanks so much, Allie, and thanks so much to Ceres for organizing today's event. So Christine really laid out, the landscape that we're operating in here, and Washington is working along very similar fronts. So we have statutory emissions limits of 45% below 1990 levels by 2030. That goes up to 70% in 2040, and then net zero in 2050. So those are aggressive targets, obviously, but those are what climate science tells us that we need to achieve. And transportation is 45% of our statewide greenhouse gas emissions. So transportation policies like ACC II are really critical. Now we have a mix of market-based and regulatory policies that we're using to tackle the transportation issue, along with a whole suite of subsidies. So, we're in the process of adopting ACC II right now. We can talk more about that in a minute, but we're also in the middle of standing up a clean fuel standard modeled after the California low carbon fuel standard, and that'll reduce transportation emissions 20% by 2038. We're also standing up a cap and invest program that also covers transportation emissions. And so that's really exciting to have 2 overlapping market programs that really just provide a lot of incentives for emitters and fuel suppliers to comply in whatever way works for their business. And then we have a clean electricity law that requires 100% clean and non-emitting power. So as we electrify, we know that the carbon emissions from our power grid are going to be going down to zero. So that's just a mix of some of the really exciting transportation-focused programs we have. And then, I just wanted to circle back and touch on something that Christine mentioned as well, which is that we are really strongly focused on the overburdened communities in our state that have been historically marginalized and just not taken into account by government programs. We're really centering those communities in our current climate efforts, and we actually passed a law in 2021 called the HEAL Act, which is the Healthy Environment for All Act, that requires the centering of environmental justice and establishes a state environmental justice council. And part of the reason why we're particularly excited about all these transportation-focused programs is that many of our overburdened communities are overburdened in part from transportation emissions, from ports, from on-road emissions, from aircraft. And so as we decarbonize the transportation sector, those are the communities that are going to be disproportionately reaping the benefits. So we're very excited about that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Joel and Christine, for that emphasis. It's really exciting to see the evolution of where we are on the policy front and the importance of multiple policies in order to achieve our goals. We'll talk a little bit about the help and support you're going to get from the federal government in just a moment, but I did want to transition just quickly to talk a little bit, if each of you can outline the actual timeline for your state on ACC II rulemaking, how folks can get engaged, kind of that implementation process and what folks can expect in each of your states. Christine, I'll let you go first.
Okay, great, thank you. So one thing I'll mention is that in Massachusetts, we have a statute that requires us to adopt California standards unless the federal standards are more stringent. So as we've done many times, we will be adopting ACC II, and we plan on doing it by the end of this calendar year. And the reason for that is we want to capture model year 26 because we want to get those EVs in the state as soon as possible. And where we are right now, last week, we held 2 stakeholder webinars, one last Tuesday and one Wednesday evening. Had a really good turnout from our stakeholders. Those materials are up on our website. So again, we will be adopting by the end of this calendar year. And one of the tools we've used in the past is to do it by emergency rulemaking, given that California will not be finalizing until later in this year. So that's our plan.
Thanks, Christine, and great to try and get in that 26 model year. So important, especially as we're approaching 2030 very quickly. Joel.
Exactly.
Yeah, thanks. So we are on a very similar timeline to Massachusetts, following on CARB's adoption of the rule. So we announced our proposed rule on September 7th. And so we're in a public comment period now that runs until October 19th. Very much welcome public comments. You can find the comment submission portal on our website, ecology.wa.gov. And we have a public hearing that is on October 12th at 1 p.m. Pacific. And we are wanting to capture that 2026 model year. There are also a couple of additional provisions that we're adopting following California. So we're adopting early action credits. And then we're also adopting the fleet reporting provision, the one-time fleet reporting requirement for heavy-duty vehicles that California included as part of this rulemaking. And that is to help us plan out some future policy initiatives on the heavy-duty sector, but to base that on data.
That's great, Joel. Yeah, the data is going to be important so that we know what we need moving forward. And of course, for the automakers to know what they should be making. So that's fantastic. Well, let's talk a little bit about the incredible opportunity of the Inflation Reduction Act, which of course will be sending money, hopefully your way. In particular, one part of the IRA provides $5 million for grants for states to adopt and carry out greenhouse gas and zero emission requirements for mobile sources under Section 177 of the Clean Air Act. And of course, there are a variety of other programs. I should have also mentioned, of course, under IIJA, the bipartisan infrastructure legislation, where we saw the national EV infrastructure, the NEVI program, which of course your states both also just submitted plans for and had those approved. So curious how all of these federal programs are going to kind of be part of the suite of tools in your collective toolboxes. Christine.
So let me talk about the money for 177 states first, and then I'll go back to the other provisions. So we very much look forward to and encourage other states to adopt the California program to reap the benefits of reducing air pollution, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, electrifying transportation, but also a focus on environmental justice. There's some provisions in the California ACC II where states will be looking, and California will be looking at ways to provide equity and programs for environmental justice communities. So I think one of the things that I would be looking for at from EPA, particularly because we've been doing the LEV program for a number of years, is how to take advantage of some of those funds to do that work in environmental justice communities. So that's my thought on that. In terms of the broader Inflation Reduction Act or IRA, we don't think it's going to affect our plans to adopt ACC II, but we think it provides incredible opportunities to electrify transportation in the Massachusetts fleet. And we're excited about those opportunities. So one of the things that I hope, what I'll mention on this call, because we're joined by our business partners, is how to work with the federal government to get that money out there, how to optimize it, leverage other funding sources so that we can all meet our shared goals of getting the vehicles out there, but also the charging infrastructure, which is so incredibly important.
Great, thanks, Christine. And I will just say as a plug here that Ceres will be engaging with companies on IRA implementation in the states, to your point, to really talk about how do we leverage private and public dollars and get the money out the door as quickly as possible. So there'll be a future webinar, I'm sure. But Joel, I'll hand it off to you.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear, Allie, because yes, so many of our ZEV transition and ZEV infrastructure programs require partnership with the private sector. So really happy to have your partnership in that. So Washington is also really excited about the IRA, about the $5 million in 177 grants to help states implement more programs. Obviously, there are economies of scale here. You know, the more states in the country adopt and implement these programs, the stronger a signal that is going to send to the automakers that these are the models they need to be producing. And obviously that we want to see on the roads. We're also pretty excited about the funding for clean heavy duty vehicles. We have been for years giving out a lot of money to school districts to transition from diesel to electric school buses. That not only helps near road communities, that also helps the kids riding the buses. And I have 2 little ones, and I love to think of them growing up without asthma, which was not an opportunity I had growing up. So, you know, that's really important, and excited the federal government is supporting that. And then grants to reduce air pollution at ports. We also think is going to be really big for Washington. And then on top of that, you know, you mentioned the NEVI funds coming out of the infrastructure law from earlier in the year. Washington is expecting about $70 million from that. And we already have our state council formed that's going to be deciding where those funds get spent. That's going to be just a massive build out of our fast charging infrastructure in the state, which we really think is going to do a lot to reduce range anxiety and also to just help normalize the EV charging infrastructure for people all over our state.
Fantastic. Well, I realize we're getting close to the top of the hour, so we'll just do one final question that you all can then add any additional comments you want to in the last remaining minutes. But in particular, what do you see as opportunities for the state and business community to work together in expanding public support for ACC II, and how do you see just a need, you know, an opportunity for partnerships both with the public sector but also private sector, since I know we also have folks from public institutions on the line as well.
So I guess I'll start again. So I just want to say we really appreciate the business community support and Ceres for your work in this area. And we do see the business community as key partners we have in Massachusetts for quite a while. And in building support for ACC II, which is, as we've heard, groundbreaking due to its ambition, we're going to need to show continued progress in our EV, what I'll call enabling initiatives. We need support for continued rebates. That's really critical. We also need support for building out our charging infrastructure, as we've talked about. We're talking about leveraging funds. We've been working with our utilities. And we've worked for many years with companies across Massachusetts to install workplace charging. That's really been one of our goals, to get the charging at workplaces so that employees can see it, and our business community and employers have been really at the forefront of that. And we appreciate that, and we want to continue to have that partnership. We're also building a network of organizations through an initiative that we have in Massachusetts called Recharge Massachusetts. And we're asking employers and organizations to join. What they're required to do is do some ZEV enabling initiatives, things like installing charging, promoting EVs, electrifying their own fleets. So we are working very closely with the business community, and we hope we will be able to continue to do that. But I know we will be. So those are just a few examples.
Great, and I'll just chime in real quickly because I know we're running out of time. Yeah, we also really value the partnership of the private sector. You know, as I mentioned before, building out the charging network and just helping normalize for people that EVs are easy to fuel, and that the fueling infrastructure is ubiquitous is going to be so important to support the ZEV transition. And you know, Washington currently with no ZEV mandate on the books, you know, our ACC I doesn't take effect until model year 2025. We are second in the nation for EV adoption. And so that just shows that we have an amazing potential to really ramp up fast as ACC I and ACC II take effect here. But, it's only with the support of the private sector, adopting ZEVs in their fleets and building out that charging infrastructure that we're able to do it.
Fantastic. Well, what a wonderful note to end on. Thank you, Joel and Christine. And I'm sure many folks on the line will be participating and providing comments in both of your states, but so excited to see the supercharged efforts in your states and look forward to continuing to support the work. With that, I will hand it over back to Dave Roba to talk a little bit about how companies and investors can continue to be involved with us. So Dave, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Allie. And thanks again, Joel and Christine, and to our business panel representatives for two really great conversations. As I mentioned earlier, state policy team works to support the adoption of policies that will limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And because transportation is the largest sectoral source of emissions, both in the United States and in many states across the nation, transportation has been a particular focus for our team. So I wanted to include a quick pitch for a sign-on letter for businesses and investors that Ceres has organized for the ACC II rule. To date, we have over 40 signatures, including businesses, investors representing over $304 billion in assets under management, and several public health networks. As momentum for adoption in additional states continues to pick up, we will be accepting new signatories to this letter, and we'll be sharing it with policymakers in states considering adoption of the Advanced Clean Cars II rule. So if that is something your company or investor network is interested in learning more about, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is at the bottom of the screen, and we will, of course, be circulating the slides and the recording to everyone who's registered for today's webinar, so it can be accessed that way as well. With that, I'm going to talk quickly about a couple upcoming Ceres events. This first one is actually an online course on ESG and navigating the board's role. Registration is open now, and it is in partnership with Berkeley Law. As some folks know, we have a San Francisco office, so we're very excited to be working with Berkeley to get this course up and running. Next slide, please. We also have a great event on financing a net zero economy on September 28th. From 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Please feel free to register through the link at the bottom of the screen. That will also be in New York City. Maybe some folks are still going to be in the neighborhood after Climate Week, so please do join if you are able. And next slide. And then later in October, we will have an evening with Ceres at the JFK Library in Boston, Massachusetts. This is one of our biggest annual events. And we're always thrilled to see a lot of familiar faces coming back year after year. So hopefully we'll see you at that event as well. And with that, I think we're going to wrap things up. Thanks again, everybody, for making time to join us today. If you have any questions or comments about the webinar, please feel free to reach out to Allie or I. Again, our emails are on the slides. And then we also have a survey that folks can complete by scanning the QR code to let us know what you thought of today's event and help us improve our webinars in the future. So please also complete that if you have time and are able. And with that, just want to say thanks again to all of our webinar participants, to everybody that tuned in, and to everybody in the advocacy community who is going to be partnering with us on further adoption of the Advanced Clean Cars II rule. So thanks again. Have a great week, everybody, and take care.